Hello, everybody out in Manchester, Hooks, and Auburn, the area for this show.
And worldwide on the
and
internet.
worldwide on the web, of course. This is the progress report for the last Wednesday in April. It's April 27th. It doesn't feel like spring a bit. As you've been outside, you know that. But it is almost the end of April. And we are having ourselves a fine show today. We have a really distinguished guest, our Secretary of State. And to introduce the subject we're going to talk principally about, we'll talk about other subjects, but principally about the administration of elections in New Hampshire, which is the responsibility of the Secretary of State, among other things. And we have a video to kick it off.
Yep, let's take a look.
It doesn't happen like we think it does. No one rolls the tanks. No armies meet in pitched battle. It happens quietly, little by little. And because so many think it can't happen, it does happen. Little by little, the rules change. It doesn't seem shocking or sudden. And that's the point. Fewer places to vote, longer lines. Don't worry, they say. We're just improving the system. They hope we won't notice the rules are changing because they lost the last election. They hope we just won't care enough to stop them. They believe they can take America away from us, and we won't even notice. We know who they are. We know what they want. The question is, who are we? Do we let them get away with it, or do we fight? Democracy is on the ballot. Vote while your vote still counts. The Lincoln Project is responsible for the content of this advertisement.
Very good video, Mike. Thank you.
It's important stuff. I know I've leaned on this particular producer probably too heavily. I'm going to try to spread it around, but this one, in 1 minute, it said what's at stake. And there are many functions in the Secretary of State's office, but one of the most important one is organizing the best-run elections in the United States of America, right here in New Hampshire.
And I think we probably have more elections than most any place between the
I know I vote a lot.
Years with the municipal elections, an even number of years, and electing our governor every 2 years. These are many things that are pretty much unique.
And we throw in 400 state representatives so we can,
reps,
vote for a lot of
5
people.
executive counselors that have power beyond any similar body in the rest of the nation. And we are a nation that's dependent on people's participation in our democracy.
We even elect the people who run the elections.
Yeah, we do.
At least in the cities, the selectmen.
Yeah. Well, the Secretary of State is elected by the members of the General Court every term. And we are very pleased to welcome to join us now a fairly new Secretary of State, although he has a long history in that role as a deputy to the legendary William Gardner.
You're one of the few people alive who can say a new Secretary of State here in New Hampshire. I mean, those are words that haven't passed lips in a long time.
That's true. That's true. And that is David Scanlon. And he served as a long time as a deputy Secretary of State, and he has succeeded to the estimable, legendary role of Bill Gardner of Manchester, who is now stepped down after how many years? 38, 40?
45.
45?
Yeah, 45.
Oh, my goodness. Time stands still for Bill Gardner.
You missed a few of them, Bob.
I missed a few of them. So, David, tell us a little bit about yourself, how long you've been doing this, and a little bit about your background so folks can relate to that.
Sure. Well, thanks, Bob, and thanks, Mike, for inviting me to be on the show. As you mentioned, I had been Bill Gardner's deputy for 20 years, which to me was a tremendous education. I thoroughly enjoyed working with him. We still communicate very regularly, and he's just a wealth of knowledge. And I think that in the future, his time in office will be looked back upon as a really good time for New Hampshire, and certainly in terms of the integrity of elections and things like that. My background before that was I spent 8 terms in the legislature. I have a background in forestry. I graduated with a degree from West Virginia University. Moved to New Hampshire right out of college with my first job in forestry. And as I was engaged in that practice, I became involved in some environmental issues. Testified before the legislature, and I caught the bug, and the rest is pretty much history. has been quite an experience. And New Hampshire is a state that conducts probably more elections than any other state in the country. We certainly have more elective offices than at least most states in the country. And as we know from our engagement in the presidential primary, the citizens of New Hampshire are highly engaged in that process. And if you talk to the average person on the street, they've probably served in local, county, or state government at some level or in some capacity, and so they're familiar with that process. And that's what makes New Hampshire a really, really great place.
It certainly is. We all agree on that, David. So you've ascended, and now we have major changes coming through the legislature. At least it seemed to me they're major.
Before we get there, Bob, though, as I did out before the show, can I interrupt just a little bit? Because I know the juicy, sexy part of the Secretary of State's office is elections, election integrity, and we're going to dig into that at length over the course of the hour. But there's a lot of other stuff that the Secretary of State's office does. You have a lot of people working there for you. I'm thinking the corporate division, just keeping track of every corporation, making sure that they're they're who they say they are, and there's a lot involved in that. Could you just kind of talk a little bit about the department that you oversee and all the work that they do for the state that most folks probably don't even know about?
Sure. Well, the Department of State is a state department, and we literally we're unique in that the Secretary of State is a constitutional office. It has one foot in the executive branch with the agencies that we're going to talk about in a second, and then the other foot is in the legislative branch. It's the legislature that elects the Secretary of State, and the Secretary of State has to perform certain functions for the legislature and the governor and the executive council. So we have a number of divisions within the department, starting with corporations, and any business entity that operates in the state of New Hampshire, other than a sole proprietorship, has to register with the corporations division. We collect annual returns from each of those businesses, and we've been spending a lot of time putting those operations online so that individual business owners can do their business with the Secretary of State's office online. We actually are going through some pretty significant changes right now, and hopefully our customers will see some improvements very quickly. We also have a Bureau of Securities, which regulates broker-dealers, those individuals that operate with financial instruments, stocks and bonds, mutual funds, things like that. They have enforcement authority to make sure that those individuals that are registering are doing the job correctly. We have the Division of Vital Records, which collects vital record information from the citizens of New Hampshire every time there's a birth or a death or a marriage or a divorce or an adoption. Those records are kept. And by the Division of Vital Records, we have a section in the state archives. It's called the research room, but contains many, many genealogical records. And we have many citizens of New Hampshire that go up there and research their family tree and try and find out who their ancestors were. It's a fascinating process. So in the archives building, we have the Division of Archives and Records Management. Archives houses some of the most precious documents, not only for the state of New Hampshire, but the United States of America. And one of the most precious documents that we have is the ratification document to the United States Constitution that actually
Number 9, the one that made it happen.
Made us the country. And it's a very precious, priceless document, and so we keep it in good condition. The copy that we have is better than the one that's on display in the National Archives, excuse me, in Washington, D.C. And if I can digress just a little bit, there's a great story with that document, excuse me, and the Bill of Rights. When Bill Gardner was first elected and in one of his early years Secretary of State, they were cleaning out the middle room in the office, and doing some modifications. And some of the workmen got up in the ceiling and found a couple of long tubes. And when they pulled them down, they heard something rattling around in there. And when they opened them up, they found these documents that had been just lost up in the ceiling.
One of them being the ratification
The
document.
ratification
Oh,
document
my
and
goodness.
Wow.
the Bill of Rights. And
Wow.
Bill was intrigued. Bill Gardner was intrigued and actually took them down to an appraiser in Boston, just to find out how authentic they were. And the person almost fell over when he saw them. And it was just an amazing find.
Yeah. I had an interesting experience when I first came here back to New Hampshire, which is my native state, to practice law. One of my senior partners said, somebody over in Hartland, Vermont wants to look up the records of Hartland, Vermont. They were in the New Hampshire archives. There's a lot of but before Vermont became a state, a lot, it was a contested ground between New Hampshire and New York, and so a lot of the early records of the state of Vermont are in fact in New Hampshire. That was quite an interesting revelation. So that's really wonderful stuff. So you have many important responsibilities, and the historical legacy is certainly a big part of it. But now let's. We ready to turn?
Oh, I'm good. I just, like I said, I mean, look at all we learned, right? I'd be willing to bet that a lot of our viewers didn't know all the length and breadth of what the Secretary
I'll
of
bet
State's
that's true.
Department
And
does.
by the
So-
way, viewers, we hope you'll call in at 603-640-3091 and participate in our discussion. We look forward to our callers, and we certainly hope you'll want to participate with our guest, who's the protector of our history in New Hampshire, as we've learned, among many other things. So I wanted to talk about this bill to deal with what I'm choosing to call, and I guess it's not entirely inaccurate, for the first time having provisional ballots in New Hampshire. You said this is not uncommon in other states, but we've always wanted to announce the election results in the night election, and now you've told me there's a constitutional requirement that that's exactly what we're supposed to do. Doesn't having these ballots possibly pulled back and not counted, finally counted, contravene that? And why do we need this, and do you think we need it?
Most every other state in the country has what's called provisional ballots, and those are for voters who go into the polling place believing that they're registered to vote and their name is on the checklist, and it's not. Or there is some other issue with their ability to vote at that location. In those states, the voter fills out a provisional ballot, which will be verified after the fact, and then if the voter's qualified, votes get added to the total at some point in the future. New Hampshire has a provision in its state constitution which says that all votes that are cast during an election have to be sorted and counted, and the results reported at the end of the night on election day. New Hampshire is also exempt from the provisional ballot requirement in other states because we're exempt from the National Voter Registration Act of 1993, also known as the Motor Voter Bill.
Motor Voter Act, yes.
And the reason we're exempt is because from that time forward, we had same-day voter registration.
Same-day registration.
So,
Can I jump in a little
Sure.
bit on that? Because I have heard so many people say that you can walk in to a polling place on election day with no ID, nothing, state who you are, grab a ballot and go vote, and it counts. And that's not true. You have to sign an affidavit or otherwise prove that you're entitled to vote in that place. It's not just an open door. Or am I mistaken? Are these people correct?
you can walk into a polling place without any documentation. And you can meet the requirements of providing documentation by signing affidavits. And there are affidavits for there are two affidavits for registering to vote. One is the domicile affidavit, which says that you are a resident of New Hampshire and you reside at X address. And then the other affidavit is called the qualified voter affidavit, which is used to satisfy requirements of identity, age, and citizenship. And those are the items that a voter has to prove to be qualified to be placed on the voter checklist. If a voter submits the affidavits and no one challenges that voter, then that voter's name will be placed on the checklist. They'll proceed to the check-in table, obtain their ballot, and vote.
And that process, at least in my experience in Manchester, people from the clerk's office come and run that process. So it's kind of like going to City Hall with faulty papers, and only time is of the essence because it's election day today.
Well,
So-
another unique thing about New Hampshire is that supervisors of the checklist, or in a city, the Board of Registrars, are the only individuals in New Hampshire that can add names to the voter checklist or take names off. And those are the individuals that have stations on election day at a registration table to accept those applications and approve them on election day so that a voter can proceed to vote.
So I understand this, Secretary of State Scanlon. You sign these affidavits. They're signed under pains and penalties of perjury, but perjury is not often charged, maybe never charged, because it's a very hard offense to prove, number one, and there's a real problem of resources to pursue all these things. But is there any evidence that this system has actually been abused at all?
Every election, there are individuals that are charged for inappropriate activity while voting. It's usually just a handful. We don't see any evidence that there is rampant, widespread, organized, fraudulent activity.
Yeah.
But there are individuals that occasionally will try and get away with voting twice, for example.
Well, that's the most common thing, and it's very rare. But of the possible bad things that can happen, that seems to be the most common one, and it's very rare.
How about impersonation voting? I hear a lot of people saying, they say I voted, but I didn't, or something like that. Is that a common thing that people are complaining about? I've actually heard people say that. It's like, really?
Yeah, there was a case up in the Lebanon area where an individual went in and voted, and then came back dressed as a man or a woman. I forget, but the different gender than they showed up the first time, which is a really interesting case. That individual was caught. You hear people walking into the polling place sometimes and claim that their name was already crossed off the checklist, and that does happen occasionally, but more often than not, it's because the ballot clerk that was making notation just crossed the name off of somebody else that appeared above or below that individual, and they just.
And as someone who's done that, it's a long day, and I mean, literally, it's done with a pencil and a ruler. It's very mechanical. And it's, to me, surprising. Mistakes don't happen more often because there's a high volume of work to be done, and it's a long day.
And that's a really important part about our elections. It makes our elections great, but it also allows for
Human error.
Lack of perfection, because we rely on literally thousands of locally elected or appointed local election officials. They're your neighbors when you go in to vote. And if you live in a small enough community, you know the people that you're voting for. And you know that, the moderator that you voted for can be trusted and has a high degree of integrity.
Yeah.
And those individuals, because they're so close to the community, have a pulse. They feel the pulse of what's going on in a polling place. And if there was something that was really unusual or foreign, I think that they would sense it.
So it was reported that you were in favor of this change to have these provisional ballots, if that's still the correct term. And that kind of surprised me. Why were you in favor if there's no record of a problem with this system? There's no documented case. Maybe it's hard to prove. No documented case of somebody's affidavit being proven false.
People have their beliefs about how the process works. Maybe based in reality, it may be a perception, but what a person believes, what a voter believes, is really important to the process. And if we start talking about elections in the most simple form, and I make a statement that every voter who is properly qualified should have an equal and easy ability to vote in an election, I would hope that there would be unanimous support for a statement like that. But when you start moving away from that, that single premise, there is a tension that builds between making voting easy and making sure that the vote is secure, making sure that the individuals that are participating are properly qualified to participate in that election. And every voter has a right to know who is participating in the election along with them. So you have a natural tension between making voting easy and making it secure. They tug on each other. And it's the policymakers in the state legislature, that has to find out where that balance is. And when that balance gets pulled a little bit too far in one direction, whether it's making it too easy to vote or making it too difficult, you're going to affect a certain percentage of the population of voters thinking that this isn't right, we have to change it. And so I think in a perfect world, if we're going to implement practices that make it easy, we should also have a discussion at the same time about what are the safeguards that are going to be in place to make that happen. And I think what we're going through right now is trying to move the chains again. I mean, voting in New Hampshire right now is very easy. It's probably the easiest state in the country to be able to register.
Well, I'd
say hooray, hooray.
But I would push back and say that we don't have early voting. We don't have no-fault absentee ballots. I mean, it could be easier, I guess is all I'd say. It is very easy. We do not have actually we do have long lines at the polls, but not too long, not around the block.
Presidential elections,
Yeah.
particularly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it is very easy. I'm not trying to dispute, but it could be. There are things that could be done to make it even easier without affecting the qualification question.
Yeah. So, to me, this is a really key question. In spite of the fact that the record shows that New Hampshire runs all these many elections we have, and as you pointed out, probably have more than any other state in the nation, and it has done so, back to Bill Gardner, back even before him, with no real widespread indication of any fraudulent attempt. A few individual things have come up that are troubling, but no wide-scale problem at all. And yet
Just look at the recounts.
And
You know what I mean? The recounts.
And
very rarely
yet
make a
we're
change.
looking to make this change to our. We've already made some changes. Now you have to show some ID when you go up to prove to the person you are, even if hey, Cindy, I know
that.
you. I've known you for years. You know who I am. Well, I still got to see your, photo ID. Okay,
oppose
that's not too burdensome. I'm okay with that.
I'm not.
Never
have been. Sorry.
And we still have what I think is one of the great things is same-day registration. So if you said all of a sudden that this election concerns me, I'm going to go down and I'm going to be able to vote, and you can. If we do all that, why do we need to change this? Because the people have a perception that's wrong, when the fact is nothing wrong. So that may want to get to the discussion of your commission. Is that right?
You want to take a break before we jump into that, Bob?
Well, unless Secretary Scanlon wants to respond to me right now, then we can take a break.
That might be a longer conversation. Yeah.
Okay, you want to take a break?
Sure.
Okay, we'll take a quick break. Hey everybody, this is the progress report for this, the last Wednesday in April, April 27th, and we are having a fine time with an excellent guest, our new Secretary of State, David Scanlon, who long served as the deputy to the legendary Bill Gardner, who did finally retire after 45
Big shoes
years.
to fill.
I mean, my gosh, and that man knew more New Hampshire election history than anybody ever will, although I'm sure David comes in a close second. And we are talking about the changes that we are seeing being urged on to change the electoral process in New Hampshire. Particularly, we started out talking about the issue of provisional ballots, where some ballots will be counted on election day, but they may be the count may be changed depending on whether the necessary documentation can be forwarded and whether that's really necessary. But in any event, the big news that Secretary Scanlon made last night was on Channel 9. It was the lead story in the Union Leader this morning, so I hope you've seen it. He has decided that it's time to have a commission to deal with the issue of voter confidence in New Hampshire. We believe, and I'm sure the Secretary would agree with me, we believe that people should have the highest confidence in our election system in New Hampshire because it's never been proved to be anything but above the board, honest, transparent.
And I, for one, believe that there is absolutely no reason not to have that confidence. So the problem's on you if you have the problem.
Yeah. But there is some polling indicate that even in New Hampshire, where we have a long tradition of fair, open, transparent, honest elections, a number of people are not accepting that. So with that, tell us about this commission, how it came about, how it's authorized, what you expect it to do, and your appointees, which I think are some outstanding people.
When I first joined the Secretary of State's office 20 years ago and started helping with the elections, that process was routine. It was, it was a logistical practice where we would do the ballot preparation, do the proofing, make sure all the names were spelled correctly in the right place, get them delivered to the towns. The local election officials would use them when the election was over, pack them up and store them, and then if we had to pick them up for a recount, that's what we would do. And it was just a smooth process, relatively easy, straightforward. But as time progressed during my 20 years, there was a lot more focus and attention on the election process and the politics surrounding it, to the point that even elections started becoming a partisan playground. And I think that there are some factions out there that believe if you control the people that run the elections, then maybe it's going to benefit the party or the candidate. And
that's an unhealthy attitude.
Well, I would agree with that.
If you're sworn to uphold the Constitution of the state of New Hampshire and the United States of America, you want to have free and fair elections,
Absolutely.
regardless of party. And I thought that both sides of the political spectrum, even our two sides of the political spectrum, kind of agreed on that. Is that fabric fraying?
Times have changed, and there may be a number of reasons for that, but more recently, we've had a couple of presidential elections now where the individuals that won the presidency were not viewed as being legitimate winners, from a certain segment of the population, and also during that time, over 20 years, we have seen the national polls first drop pretty dramatically in terms of the national confidence that people had in the election process, to where roughly half the electorate says, I don't know if I can believe the results of the election or not.
Is that true in New Hampshire too?
Half the electorate nationwide?
New Hampshire bucked the trend, and while the country as a whole was dropping, New Hampshire was. But more recently, polls that have come out of UNH show that the New Hampshire trend is starting to head in the same direction, and it's because of the national narrative that's out there. It's because we have national leaders in both parties that are saying things about the outcome of elections that are not helpful in terms of creating and maintaining confidence. We have social media platforms now that just hammer certain messages to create a certain agenda. Prior to the COVID pandemic, the big concern that all election officials were dealing with was cybersecurity issues and foreign actors using social media platforms to try and generate messaging that was not helpful
Now we've
and
got
disruptive.
homegrown networks that are doing the same thing. I mean, we don't need any help from the Russians.
But there are people that know how the process works, and there are people that don't, but have faith in individuals that may be passing along incorrect information about the election process. So seeing that trend and being a little frustrated about some of the things you hear about the election process and whether it's accurate or not, I thought that the best way to deal with that is create a very public conversation by bringing together a diverse group of individuals that are knowledgeable on elections, that have a good ear, that are able to listen, and to try and parse through all of the factors that are at play to try and find out, what's going on. How can we get to the bottom of this discussion?
But doesn't the existence of that commission reinforce the false narrative that there's something wrong with our elections? The mere existence that you acknowledge that some quarters, it says in some quarters, whatever the heck that is, some quarters, I know who they are, you know who they are, you know who they are, you know who they are. It's baloney. And yet, an esteemed commission of some great people are now going to sit down and give weight to that BS.
Well, I disagree. And
I respect your disagreement. I do. But.
And I'm old school, and Bob, you've been around long enough in the legislature to know that there was a time when we recognized that the state had important issues that needed to be dealt with, and it really wasn't a matter of whether you were a Republican or a Democrat.
I didn't say Republican or Democrat.
You would come to the table understanding that you may not be on the same page in terms of what the best course is to deal with a problem, but you could find enough common ground that a reasonable solution could be reached to address the problem. And so the problem in this instance, is how do we address a decline in the confidence of the election? And I think the answer is fairly easy. I mean, both sides have to listen to each other, and you have to acknowledge the tension that exists and recognize if you pull too hard in one direction, there's going to be a segment on the other side that's just not happy.
Well, I mean, I've served in the legislature too, and you, in committee you work together, and then you go out on the floor and vote against what you work together on sometimes. That's politics. I understand that part of it, but what I'm maybe I'm being too robust, but I'm concerned that the subtlety, what's going on, there's a lot of just not necessarily propaganda in favor of one side or another side. There's propaganda in the favor of confusion, in sowing that tension that you're talking about, increasing it. And I'm very concerned that by giving credence to the possibility that there might be something wrong, I'm concerned that elevates it. As I was concerned when Bill Gardner lent his prestige to the commission that he joined, to go root out voter fraud. I understand his intent was good, but I'm very concerned that it just does the opposite of what's intended.
Well, if you ignore these issues, you get nowhere. If you don't have a conversation, it's either going to get worse or stay the same.
Yeah. So let me ask you a little bit about this commission. It isn't being done pursuant to legislative direction. It's being done at your request. Are these people, I mean, you said you did not give them a specific charge, except to, I guess, broadly look into what is the source of a lack of voter confidence in our elections here in New Hampshire? Is that basically what they're going to
Yes.
do? And how do you expect them to do it? How long is it going to take to do it? What will be the final result that you expect to get from these very distinguished folks?
The committee is going to meet, the commission is going to meet to organize next Monday at 1 o'clock at the State Archives.
Will they have a budget or staff?
We will give them staff from the Secretary of State's office in terms of keeping minutes. At the organizational meeting, they're going to set up a schedule. They plan to travel around the state to make themselves available for public sessions. Any citizen of New Hampshire that wants to comment or say something about it will have that opportunity. They will probably also reach out to certain groups to come in and talk about their perspective and experiences. That they would include local election officials. It might include
party officials.
Absolutely, party officials, pollsters that have some academic knowledge about the trends that they're seeing. And then based on what they experience and what they find out, they'll decide whether there are recommendations that they can make that might be helpful to dealing with the process. There's no, they have no authority.
Do they have any investigative power?
They have no investigative power.
They can't subpoena people to come in and
No.
none of that, huh?
No, it's
going to be
just
strictly volunteer cooperation.
It's a voluntary, very public discussion on an issue that is difficult.
Yeah.
And let me just mention that the members of the commission, besides the chairs, Dick Sweat, former ambassador to Denmark and a former congressman back in the 90s, and has a lot of other accomplishments beyond that.
He does indeed.
Fascinating person, very capable, and I feel fortunate to have him on board, along with Brad Cook, who is chair of the Ballot Law Commission.
Yeah, which has statutory authority.
Well, he has some statutory authority.
Yeah.
Can you bring it onto the committee?
but Brad is an attorney with She and Finney, and he chaired a commission that Bill Gardner put together to help deal with the pandemic situation and elections, how to spend the federal money in the most efficient, effective way. Very capable. And then in addition to that, Doug Teschner, who was a former legislator back in the day when I was there, but former Peace Corps director, country director for Ukraine, and helped build governments in some African countries like Rwanda and Burkina Faso.
Challenging locations.
Well, yeah, but it's important to have that international perspective on how other countries exercise their rights to vote. Mandy Merrill,
an excellent legislator.
former senator and state representative, a very capable individual from the Portsmouth area. Jim Splain, who actually authored the law that said the New Hampshire primary has to go at least 7 days before any similar event. Olivia Zink, who is an activist, runs an organization called Open Democracy. Andrew Georgievitz is a chairman of the Republican Party in the city of Concord, also an activist. And Ken Eyring, who is an activist that kind of came out of the situation in Windham where folds in the ballot caused the machines to read.
What an interesting
Raised a
result
lot
that
of
was,
suspicions,
wasn't it?
for which was ultimately a very innocent explanation.
That was almost like a Sherlock Holmes or something.
Yeah.
And the timing of Windham and Bedford really didn't help this conversation, because those are both, I think, and you can correct me please, way off the mark. New Hampshire, those were not common in the state of New Hampshire.
That's right, but you have to remember that both of those instances happened during an election under pandemic conditions.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And part of the way that we dealt with was that while there was a state of emergency, there was an expanded use of absentee ballots, and and so we saw a dramatic increase in the number of absentee ballots that were used, and both of those issues came out of the fact that they were absentee ballots. It was the fold line on the absentee ballots that the clerk was sending out, and in the case of Bedford, which had a much higher percentage of absentee ballots than were cast elsewhere in the state, that there was, during the processing of the absentee ballots, there was a tray that apparently got misplaced and unfortunately never counted.
Just didn't get fed into the machine, which is how it's done.
Yeah, that's one thing that I think is a big factor, is because of the pandemic, the number of absentee ballots was huge, not just in New Hampshire, but everywhere. And people just seemed to find that a source of great suspicion, which I think was not well based on
I
any
found it
rational thing.
a fantastic way to vote.
Yeah.
I used it. I'm very glad I could, because I was not going in there, and I've
Even
never
I
missed
did.
an
I wanted
election.
to make sure that my damn absentee ballot went through the scanner, and I went down and asked the ward moderator. Oh, of course it did, and I said, fine, that's good.
Well, I mean, I've watched them when they come in. They get two batches.
Yeah.
You know, when the last mail comes into City Hall, they bring them out to the wards,
Yep.
and they stand there, and there are a bunch of people watching, and every single one of them goes through.
But-
And you know what? You can come down and watch too. It's an open public place. It's not suspicious. Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, and I have to put a plug in for our local election officials too, because they bore the brunt of the strain of running an election, and we had to adapt in our ability to communicate with local election officials. And I never knew what Zoom was before.
Who did?
Before the pandemic.
We know a lot about it now.
We had meetings that had close to 500 local election officials on them, and they were cooperative and attentive and participated, and just took advantage of our ability to communicate up-to-date information using that vehicle. And I certainly can't thank them enough, and can't appreciate what they do enough, because without them, our elections wouldn't work.
And not to mention the training. People may not realize, but everyone who volunteers or gets appointed or serves in lieu has to go down and take the full training course on not just elections in general. This is how this election's going to run. This is what you need to do, and this is what you need to know. And they show up at 5 a.m. to set everything up, and they're there well into the nighttime counting votes for Mickey Mouse, because they don't go through the machine. So, these people they have a thankless job. It's not easy. Bob, I hear you're going to do it next time. God bless you for volunteering. It's a great thing.
Well, when I heard about this, David, I thought it was a great idea, and I do think it's a great idea. I compliment you on getting, and it's an outstanding group of people. I had not seen this entire list, but Mike has it, and you've told us about it. And this is a group that should have some
Blue
real
ribbon panel for sure.
Blue ribbon panel that should be recognized for the competence and the level of integrity they have. But when I saw this, I thought, gee, the reason that people don't have confidence in our election is, for the first time in the history of the United States, with the exception possibly of 1860, we have a presidential candidate who lost an election, who refused to accept the result and said it was rigged and a fraud, and keeps saying it and keeps saying it and keeps saying it. I mean, I don't think we need a commission to know where the doubt about our election comes in. It's a certain person down in Mar-a-Lago and his amplifiers in the his media universe. They keep saying this. Am I wrong?
Well, certainly the former president has made some statements that are not helpful in the confidence factor. But going to a president before that, the loser of that race made some statements too about the legitimacy of that presidency, and so it's not it's not. Those statements are not mutually are not exclusive to a single party. Unfortunately, we have national leaders.
It's good people on both sides.
We have national leaders that are, that are just not helping.
Well, I don't remember any other presidential candidate losing an election and just saying that the whole thing was fraudulent and it's not a legitimate result. I'm sorry, but maybe I don't know who you're speaking about, but I'm not aware of it. But in any event, well, okay. I think the commission's great. I hope they can help restore confidence that we should have, because our elections have a wonderful track record under the leadership of our Secretary of State, now you, formerly Bill Gardner, and even going back before his many years of achieving, I think, transparent, open, honest elections that people should have confidence in. So I think this is a wonderful idea.
There's a second part to this too, and because we find ourselves in this situation, it didn't happen overnight, and correcting it is not going to happen overnight.
Yeah.
But the other initiative is going to be working with local election officials through training and communication to be as transparent as we can in the election process. There should be no secrets, and if there are situations in a polling place where somebody wants to observe the processing of absentee ballots enough that they can see what's going on, then that should be an accommodation that's made, so that we're doing things to help people understand and have faith.
Are you worried about the possible intimidation of election workers? Because we're hearing more and more, not necessarily in New Hampshire, I hope it's not in New Hampshire, threats to try and really make these people's jobs much more difficult by suggesting that they're biased or they're not, they're counting ballots.
they're
that shouldn't be
doxing them, they're
counted, or
putting out
not
their
counting
home
ballots that should
addresses
be
and-
counted. I mean, there's a real, we depend on people signing up to be election officials for very small pay and long hours, and it's a difficult job. And is that something that worries you? And will this commission be looking into that issue at all?
Excuse me. Situations like that concern me. I have not seen anything at this point that would lead me to believe that that's something that should be expected in this next election. And we have ways of knowing, what may be coming down the pike. And as part of the cybersecurity issues, we've got connections through Homeland Security, both in state and nationally, that are looking for potential issues like that. And there doesn't seem to be anything at this point that is on the horizon. Could it happen? Yes. And will we be prepared? Yes.
Good.
Good.
I like that decisiveness. No, that there should be no doubt in the public, right? Can I switch gears?
Yeah. Do you want to take another break? We've only got a few minutes left.
Yeah. Why don't we put motor through?
Motor
We'll
through.
motor
I
right.
got more things I want to
Yeah.
talk with the Secretary of State too. But go ahead.
Well, I could go in a couple directions, but I hinted a little bit at one thing that has bothered me about New Hampshire, and it's that traditional one day, got to show up. You can't get an absentee ballot unless you have a real good reason. I get it, I get it, but I also believe that the idea should be to get as many people to vote as possible. When the voter ID proposals came out, I was against them. I thought that, I used to say, not a puff of wind in my face should violate my right to vote. And so, okay, we've got that now. Is there what are your thoughts on expanding voting? Maybe having early voting the weekend before Election Day, so that people who work don't have to take time off from work. Or, I know what I end up doing is I just have a later dinner, and so I'm voting hangry, which is, maybe not the best thing. So what do you think about expanding voting, maybe drop boxes, things like that they have in other states?
I'm not a fan of those things. I believe that when we have a single election day, people focus on that, and the act of voting and the election just builds to a crescendo, as Bill Gardner would always say, and your results are known that night, and and the outcomes are known.
You don't have a scandal after voting has already begun and people might have not wanted to vote for that particular individual had they known, that kind of thing?
Well, I mean, that's one of the criticisms of early voting is, sometimes if people are voting 6 weeks out and there's a big thing that breaks 3 weeks out, you might have people coming back saying, can I have my ballot back?
I can understand that. I can understand that. I really can. But how about that absentee balloting? What's the problem
so
with that?
Other states, especially on the West Coast, have been experimenting with early voting and all vote by mail, no excuse absentee voting, and they have not seen a dramatic increase in their participation rate. And New Hampshire is in the top 3 consistently for presidential elections.
Yeah, I think
general
voting is
elections.
a solemn civic obligation, and it should involve, I think there's something about gathering together with your fellow citizens at a polling place and casting your ballot.
Have you seen how many people gather together like this these days, Bob? The world is changing. I understand what you're saying. I get it. Like I said, I get it.
Maybe I'm
it's a great thing.
But I wanted to shift to a couple other things because we don't have a whole lot of time left.
I'll recede.
Probably won't get the Secretary of State back here.
I will
real soon.
recede. Go ahead, Bob.
The Hardy, not the Hardy perennial, but the Hardy quadrennial, much in the news. Where do we stand on the first in the nation primary? Will this provisional ballot thing, as some have suggested, maybe without any reason at all, might kind of jeopardize our ability to maintain our first in the nation status? And, I know when all is said and done, you, as the Secretary of State, get to decide what is the appropriate time to be ahead of any other state with a similar primary event. So are you at all concerned about what the Democratic National Committee is hinting at, or whether any of this is going to, the provisional ballot thing is going to in any way hamstring your ability to protect our interests in that regard?
Well, I think it would be great if the Democratic National Committee would just recognize the importance of New Hampshire's role in being first and just establish that once and for all. But it doesn't seem like it may or may not happen. From my perspective, it doesn't matter what the Democratic National Committee does or the Republican National Committee.
Because you have a state statute to administer.
Have a statute.
Unlike many places where the parties run the primaries, it's an inside game. You got to be a club member to join, and this is a state function. This is run by the state of New Hampshire. It's not party oriented.
That's right, and because of that, the Secretary of State gets to make the final call on that. My approach is going to be the same as Bill Gardner's, where at this point it's still very early in the process. I'll sit back and watch, what the other states are doing, and at the appropriate time, probably sometime in the fall of next year, set the date.
That'll be.
If there is a conflict, and you do your statutory duty, and as a result, one party or the other strips delegates, say, from the convention, does that enter into your equation at all, or is it purely the statute says what the statute says?
Well, the statute gives the directive. The danger is if the people of New Hampshire decide they don't want it anymore. If we don't have that public support, then that's a danger. If the candidates from the national parties stop showing up, that would not be helpful either. But short of that, we'll stay number one.
Okay. And the other subject that I wanted to raise with you was the big conundrum that we seem to be in regard to redistricting, particularly in the congressional districts.
Oh my God! See
I
the latest
don't know.
proposal?
I don't know whether you've taken a position on whether the redistrict maps are good or not good. The governor seems to not think they're not so good. He's said that, and even the latest edition. But how we are off? How long can we go without having this resolved before it begins to affect your ability to run the election and get out, ballots to military people and absentee ballots and all of that?
We're following it closely. We don't have a position on, what the map should be. That's we've decided that's the realm of the legislature, and however they get decided. We'll put the ballots together based on the plan. If we're just talking about congressional districts, we can go ahead and prepare the rest of the state ballot, and if the districts of Congress linger and there's a delay, a significant delay in what they're going to be, then we would probably have to produce a second ballot just for Congress to issue on primary election day.
Have we ever had to do that before?
Yes.
Really?
Back in 2000, it may have been 2002, we actually had 3 ballots for the primary. We had a separate ballot for state representative, a separate ballot for the state senate, and then everybody else.
And that would be as a result of the 2000
Redistricting.
decennial census and the maps that were worked out in response to that. If it comes up again that we are going to have an opportunity for the legislature to pass, I hope this can happen, a bill to provide for an independent redistricting commission, as we had when the Democrats had passed it and when they had control, only have it vetoed by Governor Sununu. Did you take a position on that, and would you take a position on that as to whether this should be done by an independent commission rather than left to the desires of the prevailing party in the decennial years?
Yeah. We've stayed out of that debate because the Constitution charges the legislature with the redistricting process. And if the legislature decides they want to do it on their own, we'll create ballots for the districts that that they've established. If the legislature decides to create a commission that's going to design the districts, then that's their prerogative.
Okay.
But we have stayed out of that debate.
Okay. Well, very good. We're almost out of time, but are there any other plans you have for the Secretary of State's office now that you're the man at the top?
What for 20 years you've been dying to do?
I mean, you've put in a communications person, which I think is a great idea. I found her a very pleasant person to deal with, scheduling you here.
And she's been great. I also have a chief of staff, which is new, just to help with the day-to-day management of the agencies, and that has really put us on a good track. But beyond that, the focus for me is the 2022 elections and making sure that we run fair, sound, accurate elections, and and we report.
Will your
results.
commission have something for us before the election in 2022?
I don't know the answer to that at this point. I think that there's certainly time for them to have something.
Yeah.
They want to operate on a fairly aggressive schedule, having a couple of meetings a month for the next 3 or 4 months.
Yeah. Well, I certainly think it's a wonderful idea. I don't know if you still have cautions.
I hope the good outweighs the bad. Let's put it that way.
I think it. I think it's the right thing to do, and you've got an outstanding group of people. So I applaud your initiative in getting this done, and I'm hopeful that the results are going to be very, very favorable, and we'll restore voter confidence in our elections, which should be there because there's no reason not to be confident in our elections. They've always been transparent, honest, and anybody can look into the gears of this thing and see exactly how it works.
The point you made in the newspaper about being so decentralized,
Yep.
you would have to get to everybody if you really wanted to have an impact.
The fundamentals are there, and we just have to educate the population on how that process works.
Okay. Well, we're at the end. Thank you, David, for
Yeah,
coming
it's
and
my
joining us.
pleasure.
It was a
Yeah.
real
Great to
pleasure
have
to
you.
have you here, and I feel I was very fortunate to call you, and then you made some big news that we could talk about here. And I'm sorry we didn't get any calls. Call us. Where are you? You should have been on this show.
Yeah, this was a good one.
This is a good one, and you won't be back.
I will
I'll be
not.
back next week with Lou D'Alessandro, folks. Take
Join
care.
us next week, folks.
Enjoy this evening. Bye.